Welcome to Your Gray Matters, the podcast that unveils the miracles already amongst us. Here, we believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. Tune in to discover the fascinating people with extraordinary stories, innovative products, and groundbreaking services. With your host, Neil Silvert, who's earned his gray hair and still has use of his gray matter.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Your Gray Matters podcast. I'm Neil, and I'm glad to be here. And you know that we bring you insightful people. We bring you great topics and great products that exist, but maybe you're not aware of any of them because we believe that the human mind cannot be defeated. We will always find a way, and we love that at the Your Gray Matters podcast. Folks, I am thrilled today to welcome two very special guests, two guests who have become good friends. You may recognize their names. They are known as Cypher and Fox, and they're better known today as Tanya and Ryan Davies, which are their real names. Together, they are the creators of the Northern Perspective podcast. They're not only passionate truth seekers and commentators, but also parents, creators, and they're outspoken about the world and the need for honest media. And there's an unusual idea, folks, honest media. We're going to talk about this today. Ryan Davies, he's from Lindsay, Ontario originally. He studied philosophy, and then he had a successful career in IT. He worked in broadcasting, healthcare, data management, and government sectors. He now hosts, as I said, Northern Perspective alongside his bride, Tanya. Tanya, a very interesting person, is a registered veterinary technician from Niagara Falls originally. She has a deep love of animals, and she does traditional crafts like embroidery and woodworking. She's also a dedicated stay-at-home mom. Together, the two of them have this beautiful young man named Vincent, their son, and together they bring depth, compassion, and sharp insight into their podcast. And beyond their podcast, I can tell you they're well known. Tanya and Ryan recently made waves at the 2025 Civitas Canada Conference with their powerful talk, The Cost of Truth, exploring the personal and professional risks of speaking out against government policy. And boy, are we ever going to talk about that. Their show has become a standout in Canadian media, widely respected for its fearless approach and ability to break down issues in a way that's accessible and so enlightening. It's no wonder they've skyrocketed to the top of the podcast world. We will also today touch on their recently released beautiful book, Vincent Visits Parliament, inspired by their son, Vincent. We'll get into that a bit later in the show. Ryan, Tanya, welcome to the Your Gray Matters podcast. We're truly honored to have you here.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's really a pleasure to be here and collaborating with other people that are really trying to bring a new voice to Canadians across the country.
Thank you. And thank you again to the both of you. Let's jump right into this because we've spoken about this off camera for a number of months. But let's get into what prompted you to launch Northern Perspective. Please tell us the story behind this, and you might as well explain the names Cypher and Fox.
Sure. It's something that, we had kind of toyed with for months leading up to when we launched, but it started in, I think, isolation when everyone went into lockdown during COVID. I would kind of try and get some alone time in the basement on my computer, and I would do my thing. Sometimes that would be listening to podcasts on YouTube or just random YouTube videos. And that's where I started going down, the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole. And that kind of led to a lot of other similar content creators in that space. And unbeknownst to me, Tanya was kind of doing the same thing on her alone time. And it wasn't until I think one of the lunch times where we were just sitting there, and I think one of us was listening to it, and we kind of realized you're listening to that as well. And then the conversation slowly started to, spin around where Tanya would say, hey, we could do that, because we ended up watching a couple of creators where it was a husband and wife team, just not talking about politics, but talking about issues in Canada, and how the far left was, I would say, having a very negative effect on the nuclear family, on traditional values, and how women were even being demonized, being stay-at-home moms. But at some point she just kept saying, hey, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? And it wasn't until the Ontario government announced that they were ceasing funding for the autism program that we said, well, you know what, maybe the time is now to try and do something like this. Maybe we can get monetized in a year, and maybe that'll bring in a little bit of money for our son. So I'm not sure if you want to continue on.
Yeah, I think we were learning so much about the Canada that we live in, and not just about Parliament, which we were learning, but also about kind of the social issues that were happening and how everything seemed to be skewed towards the left. So we had decided, why don't we try talking about these sorts of things? I think the focus became on Parliament when we found that the audience was really hungry for it. And we loved talking about it. I absolutely loved learning about all the different processes and procedures. And, we started getting involved. We got involved in our local EDA, which was Flamborough Glanbrook at the time. And that's how we met you, is through the EDA. And that's what I always tell our audience: get involved in your EDA, because you have no idea who you're going to meet, and you will make friends that will last a lifetime.
And then after we started it, I'm a data guy, I'm an IT guy. So in our research, I started looking at what percentage of YouTubers end up becoming monetized. And it turns out it's less than half that end up becoming monetized. And then of those, how long does it usually take, and all of that. And so we were settling in for what might have been a long road to that. And then we launched the channel on January 23rd, 2023. And then a month later, we were monetized. And in terms of the names, why we had names in the first place is because I worked for the federal government at the time, and we had read many stories of people just arbitrarily being dismissed from their positions just because they had the wrong opinion.
Well, and not even in the government. You hear people in the private sector also being dismissed for being conservative, or for holding conservative values, or saying things that are a little bit more right-leaning online. I'm not talking about the extreme stuff. I'm just talking about, you know, just having these traditional conservative values, which we did have. Ryan was the sole income provider in our home. We have and still are a traditional family where Ryan was the main breadwinner, and my job was to stay home and keep the home and raise our son. So it was concerning that possibly we could lose, our source of income through doing Northern Perspective. It was also concerning that, could I lose my license as a registered veterinary technician? No idea. I also didn't want to be going to pick my son up at school and getting met with stares and whispers from the other moms because, oh, look at that woman's conservative. So these were all concerns that we had that prompted us to be anonymous.
But when we looked at the path that Canada was on, where ironically we were going back to demonizing people for the color of their skin, we were demonizing people for their gender, and we kind of asked the question, do we want to be 20 years down the road looking back and saying that, did we do everything possible to make a better world for our son to grow up in? And if we didn't do anything, we didn't like the answer for that. So all of those reasons kind of culminated into why we started Northern Perspective. And so we started the channel, and we were completely anonymous, save for some two terrible animated cartoon characters that functioned as us. And we figured, well, we can't just go on there as Ryan and Tanya. So we came up with some monikers. And I think Tanya's is relatively simple. You can explain it.
I just love red foxes. I think they're brilliant.
So there you go.
It's
Fair
very
enough.
basic, but
Yep.
And she had another kind of combo nickname that she had on some of her mobile games that was like that. But for mine, it was more of a dual meaning. One, a Cypher is it's usually related to encryption, and and code breaking. So in one respect, it was, keeping us secure, keeping us safe, and then in another respect, um, it ended up being a a kind of a metaphor for what we were bringing to the average Canadians in our space, because nobody else was doing that, which is deciphering the government language and bills, and essentially dropping the veil of how government worked and educating Canadians. And we unintentionally fell into that as being our niche, and that was what distinguished us from literally everybody else. Is we brought a level of research and a level of knowledge to the space that frankly nobody else had.
Understood. And I know from your saying you do it so well, of course, but part of your story is you got discovered by your employers. I wonder if you want to talk
Yeah,
about what happened there.
yeah, it was always something that was on my mind, but I never felt I would say guilty for what we were doing. It was just, when I was at work, I was 100% all in doing what I needed to do for work. My performance reflected that. My employees reflected that. I had a phenomenal team under me at the agency I was at. We completely transformed the IT department into, I would say, one of, if not the top performing IT departments in the category of small department agencies in the federal government, to the point where my boss, the president, nominated me for a security award for accomplishments in IT security, and I ended up being runner up to somebody in the RCMP. And I joke about it and saying, if I'm going to be runner up, I don't mind losing to the RCMP. So, but the irony is, when we started covering committee, that's when I think we really started to draw in a unique audience, and we started to gain the attention of even the members of parliament, because they started getting emails from people that they wouldn't otherwise. And they started hearing about these clips, and they started hearing about this channel that was hosting these late night 4 or 5 hour live streams that people were watching as if they were watching a sporting event, to two random people that nobody knows who they are giving accurate color commentary of what's happening in committee. So we really started following the ArriveCan investigation that the Conservatives were bringing at the OGO committee, public accounts, and ethics committees. And we brought so much attention to that the government started to get very concerned as to how much negative response Canadians were actually providing to them as a result of these contractors double dipping, one hand in the government and one hand into the contracts that they were getting from the government. So in June of 2024, a directive was sent out that all employees had to disclose their side income.
I think it was May, if I can just correct you.
Sorry, it was actually March of 2024 where that directive was out. And put it this way, long story short, I'm no longer working for the government, and I'm still doing Northern Perspective. So that's that basically tells the story of what happens when a random government employee is running a podcast.
Well, and I just want to cut in and say, if I can add, that all of the work that we did on Northern Perspective was on our own time. It was always after hours. It was after Vincent went to sleep. So we would start at 9 o'clock at night.
Oh.
Sometimes we wouldn't finish until 11 o'clock or sometimes midnight. And it was done on our own equipment. And none of the information that we were providing was like government secrets or anything that Ryan had learned on the job. It was all things that were readily available to the public that people could go and learn for themselves. We were just finding it and telling the audience about it.
Well, and that's something I took very seriously. Being a public servant, knowing that I was getting paid with taxpayer dollars in some way, shape, or form, I took that very seriously, and I didn't want to take advantage of that at all, because we were literally criticizing the government for misspending taxpayer money. And I wanted to make sure that I was respecting that. So, as I said before, when I was on company time, it had 100% of my effort and 100% of my time. And if I ended up getting a call at 8 or 9 at night, we would stop what we were doing with Northern Perspective, and I was on call, and off we went. And that did happen from time to time. But it is what it is.
But what you're saying is you did your job, you did it properly, you were awarded for the work that you did. It was
Mhm.
well after your time as employees for the day and the time that you spent as parents. And then you went on camera. So far, I don't see a problem with that. And yet, you were relieved of duty, so to speak, by your employers, our government, or the government at the time. I'm fascinated, though, because something happened on June 17th, 2024 for you guys. There was a turning point. Maybe you can talk about that day.
So on June 17th, we kind of shocked the YouTube community in our space by appearing on camera as Ryan and Tanya for the first time. And we put out a video with a very important message and powerful message. And, up until that point, people were constantly wondering who we were. There was theories that I worked for CSIS. There was theories that I was a lawyer.
Wow.
We were both Russian agents. Like there was all sorts of wild theories because again, all people saw were these two images on the screen and they could hear our voices. And people knew that we were real in some capacity because we had been running live streams and interacting with the audience for a long time. But people didn't know who we were. Who are these people? How do they know all this about government?
So on June 17th, we announced ourselves to the world, as it were, and we were very, very taken aback at the response from the community that we had built up to that point. Because as of June 17th, I no longer worked for the government, and Canadians across the country they opened their hearts, opened themselves up to us, and we received hundreds, if not thousands, of emails of support, and we were constantly getting emotional when those would come in, because they were saying to us that you guys have given us so much and we want to give back to you now when you guys need it most. So that was very, very humbling, I would say. But that let us know that, the Canada that everyone thought was gone, it's still there.
It's still there in the people.
And that's where we knew that we're going to be okay. No matter how long it takes to get a conservative government in there and try to get this reset back to center, no matter how long it takes, we're going to be okay because the spirit of Canada is still out there.
I have to say, too, it must have been until people started reaching into you, as you just said, it was a courageous move on your part. You must have been frightened, I think. Or was there a long discussion about unraveling Cypher and Fox and presenting yourselves, or was just something that the two of you just agreed on and you went for it?
I think we sensed at some point in time that it would either be Ryan continuing his career as a public servant or we would be doing Northern Perspective full time. It was going to be one or the other. We kind of thought it wasn't planned. We just kind of had an inkling that it might come to that. And it of the weekend it happened, we knew it was going to happen. We took the full weekend to get the studio ready, it was a spare bedroom at the time. It's not this studio. It was a small spare bedroom in our house that we had been using as an office, and we completely revamped it into like a news studio. And that was all done in a weekend. And we recorded the video. I think it was on the Sunday. And then on the Monday is when we released the video.
Yeah, and we'd said to everybody on, ironically, that Sunday night live stream, we'd said, we're releasing a video tomorrow and it's probably going to be the most important video we've ever released, and we need everyone to look at it. And everyone was kind of guessing why. And then, when they when they saw us, that's when the collective crap hit the fan, I guess. Yeah. is what I would say. But
it's allowed us to interact with our audience in a completely different way. And we're incredibly grateful that we can now, because before we were hiding, nobody knew who we were. We couldn't really go to events, but now we can, and people know who we are, and we get people coming up to us and giving us hugs and shaking our hands. And we're just able to talk and interact with Canadians. And it's just so wonderful. We weren't able to do that before when we were anonymous.
The bravery that you showed was a perfect example of who we Canadians really are. I've often said to people, we're slow to anger, but if you anger Canadians, we'll let you know it. And we proved it in many wars. where it was the last thing that any of us wanted to do. And this was the last thing you guys wanted to do, was have to hide who you are, especially with the two of you being such fabulous people. I have to ask you this, and if you don't want to touch on it, then we won't. But you also didn't take this sitting down. You fought back, I believe, not just by opening people up to who you are, but also, did you not go after your former employers?
So what I can say is I've engaged in litigation, and I can say that has now been resolved, and that's been resolved to my satisfaction.
Very good. Good for you. You know, I love all people and I respect everybody, whether they have jobs or they're entrepreneurs. If they're seeking joy, then that's the best thing in their lives, is to seek joy and find that joy. And what you guys did was you found your own joy, and then you've taken probably millions of people with you to their own joy, at least having an expectation that our country is worth fighting for. That's why I'm so glad to have you on today. And everybody, really, just in a couple of years, your podcast has grown to like almost 180,000 subscribers. Maybe you got over. I heard that you were about 500 away from that, the last podcast I watched, other than today's. But congratulations, because that is huge. That is huge. And for folks who don't understand what these two wonderful people have done, not many people would even get on a microphone or stand up and speak publicly anywhere. And for these two, to me, young folks, doing this on behalf of our country, it's an amazing, amazing thing. And I guess that really is why your message really resonated. And I call you actually being a part of honest media. You decided to be the reporter of the news, commentator of news, but not the creator of news. And I find media thinks that their job is being the creator of news. You haven't gone that way. And for that, if I had a hat, I would take it off to you, because, and I think you'll agree, honest integrity in media is lacking, is it not?
100%. And I would say it's lacking in main legacy media and independent media in many ways. But you're 100% right, Neil. There was a saying, I forget who told us this, but when it comes to reporting, if you are the story, then you're doing something wrong.
That's right.
And we've had kind of forks in the road where we had choices to make, and some choices would have led us down into that path of becoming the story, and we kind of stopped, checked ourselves, and said, you know what, that's not the path we want to go down, because this isn't about us. It's about Canadians. And I think that was one of the benefits starting as two anonymous people, that it wasn't about us because nobody knew who we were. So our initial brand was all about just the information, and that's what we wanted. And I think if we had the choice, we probably we might still be anonymous. I don't know, but
Well,
we
you'll
don't
never
take
be
this
again.
fame thing very well.
I honestly don't like having to do my hair and my makeup every single day.
Well, I don't do my makeup, so I don't know why you have to. So
Yeah, I don't know why she's
Yeah.
complaining.
You can get away with it, okay?
But as it comes
Tanya,
back
Tanya,
to
we're going to help you with that. We're going to help you with that.
But as it comes back to honest media, there's temptation, and I think it's always there for people. It's always there for us, and we try to resist it every day. It's to be as sensational as possible and emotional as possible. And why? Because sensationalism and emotion, that's what gets you the click. For some people, getting a click, getting that attention, that's as addictive as fentanyl.
Yeah, you get that dopamine hit again and again and again. And then when you create something that's so emotional, people share it around. They go, oh, hey, did you see this? Look at this. This is unbelievable. Have you seen this? And we try to stay far away from that style of reporting.
And then when you have some videos that do really well, you get that high. But then if you have some other videos that don't do well, that's almost equivalent to the crash that you get when you come down from that high on an illicit substance. So it causes people to then chase that to try and get it back, and they will try and get it back any way they can, and sometimes that leads them down further and further and further down that sensationalist route. So that's one issue that is out there. It's an issue that we see right now because there's a lot of negative emotion out there. So what is getting the clicks? A negative feedback loop when it comes to Canadian politics.
Well, and Canadians, conservatives especially, are upset with the results of this election, and we are too. But we know that there's a process in place. We know that Elections Canada is following that process, and that there are people behind the scenes, such as yourself, such as us, the scrutineers, the volunteers, everybody who is making sure that this process runs smoothly.
And in many cases, and this is a time period that's one of them, we are not afraid to stand up and speak against what is trending out there, which is people saying the election is rigged and people saying that, it is over for Canada and Canada is dead. And like, there's a lot of that going on, but we are pushing back against that, and we're not getting, a ton of views for those types of videos. But for us, that's okay, because we can go to sleep at night knowing that we are giving Canadians what they haven't had in years, which is the unfiltered truth.
Right, and the truth matters.
Yes, yes, it does. I will tell you, on this podcast, we've never actually delved into politics. And you both know that I was quite involved in it. One of the few seniors that I know of who I felt I actually had to take a job with an MP. I wasn't looking for a paid job, but I had to be in this last election because my kids and grandkids, I want them to be able to live here and continue living here. I find it horrific that at my age of 71, the thought that we may not be able to is very hard to even grasp. So I appreciate the fact that you're going after truth and talking your truth, and yet you're not going for the glitz of the industry. And I appreciate that. I'm reminded of that meme of the late Walter Cronkite, where it said, "Hey, kids, you're not going to believe this, but this guy was on TV for like 50 years, and all that he ever did was read the news. He didn't actually make it." And I think it's actually one of the best memes that I've ever seen. I want to ask you, with all the interviews that you've done, guys, has there ever been an interview that's just left you stunned or changed or deeply affected you? Do any stand out?
Yeah. Aside from just the opportunity to interview Pierre and his wife, I'll put that one to the side. My guess is this is going to be the same for both of us, but the one that really hit me was our interview with Michel Junot Katsuya, when we were speaking with him about corruption in Parliament and how many parliamentarians CSIS knew of that were witting or unwittingly collaborating with foreign states. We knew of the 11 that came out of the Enzicop report. And during this interview, I'd asked the question, how many are there? And he said, it's not 11. The number is over 50. And I almost fell out of my chair.
Oh my.
And that's past or present. But still, when you're talking 50 parliamentarians that are either in Parliament or are no longer in Parliament that have been collaborating in one way, shape, or another, knowingly or not, with foreign states against the interests of Canada, that was a shock. That was it just completely changed my perception of the reach of foreign actors when it came to our political system, and it just heightened the need for attention on national security even more so. I'm not sure if that was the same for you.
Well, we've had so many interviews and they've all been absolutely incredible. But I think the one that sticks out to me the most is the one with Pierre and Anna Poilievre. And the reason for that, I think, is because I was able to connect with them on such a personal level.
Yep.
Both Anna and Pierre, as well as us, we have an autistic child, and their daughter Valentina is also autistic. And if you have a special needs child, I think raising kids is hard anyways. We only have the one, so we can't really say for sure. But I think if you have a special needs child, there's just so much more of yourself that you have to give. It is It is harder, but it can also be so much more rewarding. And I was really able to see Pierre not just as a politician, not as just leader of the opposition, but as a dad. And I think that was really, really important. You know, a few days before that interview, we had actually been here in Hamilton, and Pierre and Anna were there as well. And Vincent, our son, had interrupted Pierre's press conference. So we had asked our friend, can you please take Vincent outside? And there was a playground out back, and he was able to play and have some fun instead of being this stuffy press conference, you know? And Anna had followed him outside. And I just thought that was such a kind gesture that she understood, you know, not only is he young, but also he has special needs. And so it was very difficult for Vincent to be inside the press conference. So she was able to go outside and spend some time with him. And that's just the kind of people that Pierre and Anna are. They don't just care about the politics, they care about the people. And I really felt that I was able to connect with them and see that side of them that you don't see in the legacy media.
Well, and you know, the first time we met Pierre was in the summer of 2023. So it was after we'd started the podcast, and we met him in a St. Catharines rally, and
I was there.
there was a few things that stuck out to us. Is that number one, he waited until every single person in that room that wanted to meet him got to meet him. So that was the first thing that was surprising to me, because usually, and I wouldn't even blame him. Usually it's okay, you've had your 60 seconds. There's a lot of people, guys. Let's go. Come on. We there's other people online. That didn't happen. Like, it was obvious that he told his people, don't rush any of these people. They've come out here to see me, and I'm going to give them as long as it takes. It's not like he'd said that, but it was obvious in how that portion of the rally was being conducted, that those were the instructions, because no one was rushed, no one was hurried along. They took their pictures, they were able to talk to Pierre. And I always go back to this story, because we decided that we were going to wait until basically the back of the line, and there was only a few people behind us, so we waited probably hour and a half, 2 hours to see him. And there was a gentleman that was probably 10 people up from us. So we saw him go up and talk to Pierre, and it was this stocky gentleman, older guy, had a hat, gray hair, and couldn't see what he was saying to Pierre, but Pierre was just leaning in, listening to him. And then you just saw Pierre, go in and give this guy this bear hug. And I could see Pierre saying, it's okay. It's going to be okay. And the guy started, because he was crying.
And the thing is, we've told this story a few times on our YouTube channel, and the gentleman actually emailed us, and he sent pictures too. So we knew it was him because I recall exactly what he was wearing. And it's just this amazing story of how we're all connected.
And based on that interaction, and then the follow-up interactions that we had and watched, we wanted to see, is this really Pierre? Is this really the guy? And nothing changed from interaction to interaction and everything that we'd observed. So it's a real shame. It's impossible to happen, but I wish every Canadian could have 15 minutes to sit down and talk with Pierre and his wife. If they did, I can't see anyone not voting for him.
It was our greatest frustration that the war that we lost was that people don't understand what a magnificent person he is and what an incredible couple they are. These are true Canadian leaders. And this is all about you, but I was privileged because, first of all, Linda and I met him just a few months before that St. Catharines event, at MP Dan Muse took us. Thank you, Dan. And again, at that one, it was very early, and there must have been 1,000 people in the room, and I watched Pierre go right through them, even in the earliest stages. And I was very privileged because before the campaign even, when Pierre came, I received the call to be part of his entourage, and I got to drive around his media guys and spent some time with Pierre. And I was flabbergasted one of the days when I went up to say hello, and he greeted me by my name, and I was truly honored. But he's just a great human being, and unfortunately, not enough people got to understand that being the opposition leader, he was doing exactly what he's supposed to do. It's an adversarial process, as it is in court. In court, the lawyers can yell and scream at each other all day long and then go out and have a golf game together. And that was missed. So it's frustrating. One of the reasons I just twigged into you guys in the very, very early days when I started to listen to you had to do with Pierre Poilievre. You said something that stuck with me, and I've told people this about the two of you actually. You said that you support Pierre Poilievre, and you do, but you also said, Ryan, that if and when he becomes prime minister, he won't get a free pass with you, that you're an honest journalist, the two of you. And that has stuck with me, and I suspect if he heard that you said that, that's why he's stuck with you and vice versa. So I congratulate you for that. I really do. And I was going to ask you, I think that you've answered it really, but is honest reporting really your core mission or a part of your core mission? I think we've discussed that. I guess it is.
It's a piece of it. The core values that we have at Northern Perspective is whatever we're doing for the show, we try and use Canadian and use local as much as we can. That's why even our merchandise, we don't use, like, there's some kind of standard YouTube industry systems and companies that do this stuff, and they try and make it really easy. We chose not to go that route because we wanted Canadians. So the company we actually use is in Oakville. Funny enough, we came to learn later it's the same company the Canadian Taxpayer Federation uses, so we're in good company using them. So that's one. Number two is not be afraid to tell the truth.
Even if it costs us views, right?
Right, even if it's cost us views and subscribers. And
it's been the case in the past, and you might even argue currently, because again, we're not feeding into this narrative that the election was rigged or that we need a do-over or this or that. We've talked to so many conservatives that have been involved with the election, from sitting MPs to newly elected MPs to candidates who didn't quite make the cut, to scrutineers, to people on EDAs, to campaign managers, just you name it, we've spoken to them, and not a single one has said, we think this was rigged or this is unfair, etc. Right. It's people have expressed their disappointment, absolutely, and I think we're all disappointed at the results of this election, but this is the will of the people, and our democracy needs to be protected.
Well, and it kind of dovetails into, one of the other core values that we have, and one of what we consider as one of our primary products of the podcast, which is educating Canadians on how their government works. There is I would say a drought, a famine of civics knowledge in this country, where people don't. There was a whole bunch of people that voted in this election who thought when they went to the polls, doesn't matter where they were in the country, that they were supposed to vote for Pierre Poilievre. And so you actually ended up, and this is a result of us talking with these people who work the polls, they got so upset, but they couldn't do anything because people were crossing out the name of the candidate and writing in Pierre Poilievre's name. So, of course, completely rejecting their ballot, so it didn't count. You had people that had never voted before. You had people that they didn't even understand what the difference between a prime minister and a minister and a president was. So you have all of these people that, and it's not their fault. That's the fault of our system. It's the fault of our education system. And what we have told people is it seems designed to create uninformed voters, because voters that pay attention to the government are citizens that the government isn't a fan of, because they don't like being held to account. They want the citizens to just go about their business, not pay attention to them, and only pay attention to them every 4 years when they call an election, and then the government will tell you what they want to. So that's the other piece. But the last, I would say, product that is our ultimate goal is to give Canadians hope. No matter how bad the story is that we're covering, we try to find some way to end that video with some sort of hopeful message. Sometimes we can't, but we try to do that whenever possible, because we want people to be informed, and if it's bad, we're going to tell you, but we also want to say, but this is why you have reason to be optimistic,
or this is what you can do about it.
Right.
And if I can just add to your list there, I think one of our core tenets is that we always go to the source of the information. We don't just go, oh, well, Neil posted this today on Twitter. It must be true because
As reliable as Neil is.
yeah, but we all know that you can post whatever you want to social media. It doesn't mean it's true. So we are always looking for sources like StatsCan, and we use the Fraser Institute. We do use legacy media. We also use, what else do we use?
Well, we use StatsCan, we use OpenGov.ca, we use Parleview, we
yep.
use Our Commons, we use the Fraser Institute, we'll use the direct polling sources. We use sources of data that we are 100% confident in. If somebody posts something online and it looks like it's come from one of those, we'll say, that looks great. We will see if we can actually find it, because there have been many, and I mean many, scenarios where when we've actually gone to find that alleged graph or that alleged stat, it doesn't exist.
It's been doctored in some way, or maybe it's very, very old and it's being represented as being new. That's why we always try to get to the source of the information so that we can verify, is this current? Is this accurate?
Yes. And I have to tell you something. Maybe that's why you're the leader in this, because you're not going for the sensationalism. You're going for the facts and the truth. And I appreciate that so much. There are a lot of people who have a big following, political podcasts. And I mean, no disrespect to any of them, but I count on the two of you to be able to back up what you present to the best of your ability. And for me, that's huge. I want to ask you your opinion on something. And I'm not speaking about the present government or any government. I'm talking about all governments of this country, past and future. And that is simply, I have a real problem with funding media, government funding media. One might argue, even with the need to defund CBC, and that's a different topic, they do seem to have value in certain areas of this country, although everybody seems to have technology. But I cannot draw the line. I cannot connect the dots between having a free, honest Canadian media that's funded by government. I don't understand how we can possibly fund anybody in media. Maybe explain it to me, because I don't know how you connect the dots.
It's a problem. And one of the biggest problems is the media that is funded by the government and the government itself doesn't seem to like to talk about the original purpose of journalists, which is journalists exist when you strip it all down and you go back as early as you can to Western democracies. Journalists exist to hold the government in power to account. That's
Agreed.
it.
Right. And now
Yes.
we're not journalists. Neither of us have journalism credentials. You kind of worked in broadcasting, but in the IT department for a little while. So we're not journalists, and we've never claimed to be journalists. But we think it's incredibly, incredibly important for the media as a whole to remain independent and free, because the media holds the government to account, yes, but it also informs the citizens. It keeps the citizenry informed. And if you have a media that's being government funded, maybe they don't want to lose that funding. So they're not going to tell the citizenry exactly what's going on. Maybe they kind of skirt around the issue. Maybe they don't report it at all. Again, how can you have a media holding the government to account when they're on the government payroll?
Well, and we saw this before the election with CTV News, where they had created a piece which seemed like a hit piece on Pierre Poilievre about the dental program, trying
Right.
to spin what he said, not even spin what he said, doctor what he said from two completely different clips to try and make people think that he wants to introduce basically a vote to vote down dental care, which he never said at all. And it wasn't until the Conservatives actually brought that up. So why is a political party having to hold the media to account when it should be in the reverse? And we saw this over the course of the election, the bias towards Mark Carney and the Liberals. It was incredibly blatant. I ran some analysis through an AI tool that I use from time to time, and it found that over 80% of the coverage was biased towards the Liberals. That is far, far too much.
Well, and inherently, there's nothing wrong with bias. We have a right-leaning bias. we're not center, we're not
Correct.
left, we're slightly to the right.
But we tell people.
Exactly. But the problem is the legacy media in this country, the majority of it is left leaning, but tells you that they're neutral.
Right. So when it comes right down to it, how can you claim to be unbiased when a large portion of your funding comes from the institution that you are supposed to be criticizing?
Exactly.
You cannot with a straight face, say that. So, but the main problem, and this is me benefiting from working in a news organization, both in broadcasting and the other arm was newspaper, is that back in 2010, there was talk going on, and this is CanWest Global. So it was one of the largest news organizations in Canada. They were saying newspapers are dying and TV viewership is going down. So they knew that back then. The only thing that they were optimistic about is that specialty TV viewership was going up. So people were transitioning from TV Guide and waiting for their favorite show to come on to, I know what I want to watch and I want to watch it now. So I'm going to go and find it. And this is where all the IT guys were actually saying to the executives, you guys need to essentially do an online version of Netflix. Netflix is handling movies at the time. You guys need to do this for your platform. Very few listened. And look what we have now. You have all of these different subscription services that are online. But the point being is that these executives, they didn't adapt to the internet. The newspapers thought it was a fad when it first came out, and they said, oh yeah, this will go away. Well, this is probably the longest running fad in human history, but they didn't adapt their business model. So now they jump up and down and cry foul and cry wolf and say, well, we're going to die if we don't get government funding. Well, tell that to the small business down the street that died because of COVID. Tell that to the small businesses across Canada. Tell that to the medium-sized businesses across Canada where thousands of people lost their jobs and they went under. They didn't get any government handouts, but you get a handout in the amount of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars a year, or in the case of CBC, $1.3 billion every year. And all because you don't know how to manage your business. Now, when it comes to CBC, I think CBC should and can get government funded, but not from a news perspective. I think they need, it's beneficial to Canada for CBC to get back to the old school programming that they used to put on. Everyone remembers The Littlest Hobo. Everyone remembers Mr. Dress Up. Everyone remembers all of this stuff. There is nothing new that people fondly talk about that is put on by the CBC.
Murdoch Mysteries, but even that's kind of old.
Yeah, but that's such a cool show.
Yeah, right. I do like it. I'm not gonna lie, I do enjoy it.
What CBC should be doing is not really news, but more of a cultural expose of all of these communities around Canada. So they need to be getting into these, Indigenous communities and doing stories on them, not news, but stories, and pulling that into the mainstream and showing Canadians that no matter where you are, we are all connected and we're all Canadian. And that is what would really energize the CBC. And that's probably what will get people to watch again. Why? Because it's a message of hope.
That's what they're supposed to be. I agree. And when your longest running show is the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm telling you, you got to find better content. Sorry, guys. Love you all.
Right. Well, they're on season 65 of that, and it's or 68, and it's still not anywhere close to being finished. So
I'll tell you guys, the last time I saw a cup was in 1967. When I turned 67, I still hadn't seen another one. That was tough. I wanted to just raise one more thing, and then I'd like to talk to his wonderful parents. And thank you so much for this, guys. I appreciate you. I listened to John Carpe today with Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And you talked about something that is disturbing me terribly. And I'm asking it to you as fellow podcasters, but I'm also talking to you as Canadians. Bill C-63. I know, and I learned today that this bill is to protect children and other people, but we already have these laws. So there seems to be an inherently dangerous and shocking part to this bill, which in my opinion, if passed, will be the day that I think our country ceases to exist as a democratic, free enterprise country. Can you comment?
One thing that this was our second interview with John Carpe, and in our first one, he said something very, very significant. Tony's talked about it a few times, and is that there are many freedoms that you can take away from us and we can recover. The one freedom that you cannot take away, because if it was taken away, we would be literally legally unable to recover, is our freedom of speech. So, because you can take away any of the other freedoms and you can use your freedom of speech to get those freedoms back.
Correct.
But there is no mechanism to gain your freedom of speech back once it has been removed from you. So what Bill C-63 aimed to do, under the guise of helping children, was to criminalize hate speech, but in a way where it didn't necessarily have to go through court. There was going to be this new agency that was to be set up that would be judge, jury, and executioner for these types of complaints. And you could incur a maximum fine of around $10,000, I believe it was, and that's what was proposed. But you could also end up with a sentence of life in jail.
You could also end up with them saying you're not allowed back on social media ever. You're under house arrest. Like, there was so many things that they could have done. Now, this bill has died with the dissolution of Parliament 44, but Mark Carney has indicated that this may be something that he picks back up in Parliament 45. This is absolutely horrifying to me, especially as a podcaster who speaks out against the government. The day after the Liberals won, so that would be April the 29th, I drove down to my parents' house in Niagara Falls to drop our dog off because we were going to Ottawa for a few days and my mom was going to watch him for us. And I broke down crying and I said to my mom, what I am doing online to not only provide for our family, but also to speak out and to inform Canadians could land both of us in jail if the new government decides to try to implement this bill. I said, I need you to take care of Vincent if that happens, because this is the reality that we are facing. And you might think that I'm being dramatic, but the reality is that if you have hate speech, if you use hate speech online, there's no definition for what hate speech is. So what if hate speech is speaking out against the government, which we do? We do it quite vocally and we do it with evidence. I don't imagine the government likes that.
Well, and here, the other thing to consider is that in that bill, there was no, call it statute of limitations for things posted online. So you could have posted something online 30 years ago.
Right. Is it retroactive?
Oh,
No.
well, but the bill doesn't say it's not.
Right.
And that's the issue, right? So are Canadians now to be paranoid that they said something in their intemperate youth that could come back that somebody disagrees with, and now you have a $10,000 fine to pay with? The other point of this adds to the just absurdity of it is, if you get arrested for, say, shoplifting, you'll pay a fine and you could go to jail for, I don't know, 60 days, whatever the penalty is, something small. But if someone determines that you shoplifted out of hate toward a specific establishment, you could then have a life sentence added on to that because of the Bill C-63.
Because of the hate factor.
So the primary crime being shoplifting, you get a small penalty from, but the secondary crime of someone deciding arbitrarily that that was a hate crime, you could go to jail for the rest of your life. How does that make sense at all? And Larry Brock asked Iqra Khalid this very question in the House of Commons when they were debating this. And her response was, well, it's just the maximum. That was the response. Iqra, being a lawyer, that was her response to the prosecutor, Larry Brock, who's used to putting people away.
Yeah.
So the guy who's used to putting people away and prosecuting is saying, how in the heck can you justify putting someone away for a life sentence, which for people that's 25 years? How can you justify that when some arbitrary person decides, nope, that's a hate crime? And it comes back to this question, and we ended up titling an episode this, who watches the watchers? So the people that are deciding what these definitions are, deciding what's hate, deciding what can land you in jail for 25 years, who's watching them? And the problem is the answer is nobody.
Yeah.
Now they will come back and say, well, you can decide that in an election. What if the government of the day, doesn't matter what party, decides that any opposition to that government is now a hate crime? They've essentially made it impossible for anyone to criticize them, and therefore impossible for them to be removed from power.
And as I said, it would be the end of life in Canada as we know it. Let's hope, not just directing this at today's government, but any government can never do this, because then Canadians, the individual Canadians, will have to really take note of this, and it could start a reaction that we never want to see in this country either. So on that happy note, and thank you guys, because these are tough issues. Again, something that we've not done on the Your Grey Matters podcast, but we do bring wonderful people, and that's why we wanted you on. I know that when you aren't on camera, well, even when you are on camera, you are great, great parents, and you have a lovely young man, Vincent, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, and I think my bride, Linda, would just like to take him home. But
He has that effect on people.
He is amazing. I want to congratulate you on a book that we picked up, and I do want to talk about Vincent and your life as his parents, but I'm just so excited to introduce, can you see it, this marvelous book that we have, and it's simply called Vincent Visits Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, doesn't matter if you're 6 years old, 8 years old, or 80 years old, not only should every Canadian read it, but I kind of think every MP, senator, and Speaker of the House on all levels of government should read it too. I think it may be the only history being taught in this country at the moment. But tell me, folks, what inspired this great book? Why did and how did you come up with this?
Ironically, it was Vincent himself when we started taking our trips to Ottawa, and I believe that started
2023 was the first trip that we did. And we were so nervous about having Vincent in the car. He would have been 7 at the time. And we were just nervous about having him in the car for that long. The furthest he'd ever gone, I think, was my sister's house, which is about 2 hours away. And we were just scared of bringing him to Ottawa. Would he get upset for being in the car that long? Would he understand, that we're going somewhere special? And he absolutely loved it. We got to Ottawa and we spent a few days there. Our MP at the time, Dan Muse, had brought us to Parliament. He brought us on the floor of the House, and Vincent was able to sit in the speaker's chair, and it was just fantastic. And he had so much fun. I've never seen this child so happy.
Well, and after that, as soon as we got home the next day, he started saying Ottawa, Ottawa, because he wanted to go back. And to this day, if we go back to Ottawa and we don't go to Parliament, he gets very upset. He absolutely loves going into that building, even if it's just in the visitor center. There's just something about it that's magical to him. And there's something about Parliament Hill that I think should be magical to every Canadian, because when you stand there, you're standing in the history of our country. You're standing there where our forefathers made massive decisions to build this country. They made the decision to build the CN Railroad. They made decisions to build mines, to build industry, to build towns, to offer huge building projects. So the list goes on. The more we went back to Parliament, again, Tanya has these great ideas. She started tossing out this idea as a joke at first, like, oh, we should write a children's book. And then, as things went on, we said, maybe we should, because we were actually in the parliamentary gift shop and we were looking for things for kids, and there's not a lot there. Books for kids for educating people on Parliament. There's, the Constitution, there's the Green Book, Bosch and Gagnon. There's a couple of those books. So, but even those can be heavy reads for adults. So we decided, you know what, why not? Let's do that. And again, we went local and Canadian. So we used a illustrator that, lives only 30 minutes from us. Very young, talented lady, Holly Gadori. And funny enough, it was on her bucket list as an illustrator to do a children's book. So when we gave her the vision, she became as excited as we were when we were into doing this. And then when Tanya ended up finding a possible candidate for a publisher, it was the same thing. We told this lady, what the vision was, and she says, I think I get around 100 manuscripts across my desk every single month, and I need to do this book. And she became passionate about it. And then it's funny, when we got the first proof of the cover, that was it. And we made no changes. I started tearing up, and Tanya started tearing up, and when we saw this thing come to life, we just said, that's it. That's the book. And it's a way. I always get emotional talking about the book.
And so you should.
So on the cover, you see Vincent, and you see two dogs, and one of them, Sky, which is this one. She's no longer with us. She passed away
in October. It was a few weeks before Halloween.
And so it's a way to kind of keep her, alive. And Vincent still talks about Sky, now and then. But also, because Vincent is fairly nonverbal, this almost brings his spirit to life and his language to life in the book.
And his curiosity to life. Because, if we just let him loose in Parliament, he would run all over the place and be exploring and probably getting into things that he shouldn't. Yeah. So we kind of brought that spirit out in the book.
And as you know, Neil, he hears of this place called Parliament, and his dad says, where is it? It's in Ottawa. He grabs his dogs, grabs his backpack, and off he goes. That's Vincent. He would literally run to Ottawa if we let him. So.
Hopefully someday he'll be elected and be our prime minister. So, guys, one question about being parents of autistic kids, because there is, thank God, a lot of discussion now about this. But how are you finding support methods as parents? Is there a lot of support? Is there help? Or not even sure if you need it, but I'm curious your comments on it.
It's really hard. When we speak to either medical professionals or even other parents, the one thing people were always saying was never stop advocating for your child. And it was kind of confusing at first, what does this mean? And then after you hear it so many times, it starts to get kind of annoying. Yeah, okay, I've heard that before and I'm trying, but it feels sometimes like we're having to do everybody else's jobs for them to make sure that they're doing their job so that they can give our son the resources and the tools that he needs in his toolbox to be successful.
Here's a microcosm for you. Neil, have you ever had a broken bone or something like that?
Luckily, no, but I've had lots of people around me who have.
Okay. So imagine you fell, heaven forbid, but imagine you fell and you broke your arm. The first thing you would probably do is go to the hospital. So imagine you went to the hospital but you had to wait 2 years. You had to wait 2 years to actually see somebody in the hospital. And then when you got in there and you saw, the doctor finally came up, in your head, you're like, oh, finally, I'm going to be able to get some help for this. And the doctor looks at you and says, yep, that's a broken arm. How would you like me to treat that, Neil? And you're going to say, what?
What? Aren't you the doctor?
You're the doctor. Yeah. What do I know about a broken arm? You're the one who's went to school for this, right? Well, yeah, but you need to tell me how you want me to treat it. I don't know how to treat this. Okay, well, when you decide, let me know. And then when you do decide, I'm not going to be able to help you because we don't get the government funding for that. So I actually can't help you for that. So, and if you find somebody else that is private, I can't tell you whether that's a good idea or not either, because our primary job is to keep funding in the school or in the hospital. So that is the microcosm of the autism support system in Ontario. And when it comes to what that system did during COVID, Uh, I refer to the autistic kids, and it's not just them, but it's what we had experience with. I refer to the autistic kids as the lost children of COVID,
Wow.
because the minute the emergency orders were given, we came home from somewhere. I don't even know what it was. We may have been home. I don't know. But we saw there was a voicemail on our answering machine. And all it said was, "Hi there, this is so-and-so from Vincent's hospital. All his appointments are canceled. He's been discharged. Goodbye."
What? Oh my God.
Yeah. And this was only, I would say, 3 to 4 months after he received his diagnosis. Oh, no. Maybe it was only 2, because he received his diagnosis of January of 2020. And then in March was when everything shut down.
He was able to say 3 words at that point. He was able to say on, off, and
I think it was the last one. Yeah. And he was 4 years old almost.
so, and all these doctors, what they will tell you is early intervention, early intervention, early intervention. Well, when the parents are trying to get help for their child as soon as possible, and you're basically telling them we're closed for business, and you are now their entire medical system, it's a complete slap in the face, and you feel betrayed, and you become the entire autistic support system for your kid, your doctor, your speech pathologist, your pediatrician, your everything. And that's it. So
Has it changed much since when that happened to you, or
Not
even
in
now?
Ontario.
On
In
Ontario.
Ontario, when the Conservatives took over from the Liberals, they said, "Oh, these kids are waiting on these wait lists for 5+ years. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the wait list, and we're going to give them a round of one-time funding," which we got, and it depended on the child's age.
which was somewhat positive
Right.
because you
So
could use that.
Right. So for a year and a half, we were able to use these funds towards specific things like respite,
Speech
speech
therapy.
pathology, mainly ABA, and things like this. And then after that runs out, we were placed on another wait list where we were waiting for, let me see, I think it was
2 years.
2 to 3 years for additional funding. And anything that we wanted to continue with, if we wanted to continue with his speech therapy during that time, it was coming out of our own pocket. Now, we're fortunate that Vincent, although his needs are moderate, they're not as severe as some children. So for some parents, they're having to mortgage their homes just so that they can provide therapy to their children. And that's parents with one child. Usually there's a belief that there's a genetic component to autism. So often if you have one child with autism, you will have a second and or a third, et cetera, with autism as well. So could you imagine being a parent who has 3 children, all with extensive autism needs, and they're having to pay out of pocket for all of these therapies? You'll go bankrupt.
Yeah, so just to give a sense, if you have a child that needs 30, 40 hours a week of ABA, that's $100,000 a year.
It's another mortgage.
And it is, we're paying for gender reassignment surgeries out of OHIP, but we're not covering that for autistic kids. Now, the ABA therapy is another problem because it is not regulated. So you have hundreds of organizations around this country, and they are charging whatever they want. And the only requirement is that the owner of that company has to be certified. None of the people actually working with the kids need to be certified at all. One of the ladies that was working with Vincent, we came to learn later, she had 2 weeks of training prior to starting to work with Vincent.
No,
And
she was very kind, and Vincent took to her, and he really liked working with her. But 2 weeks of training is not a whole lot.
No, not
and
for
every
that.
single one of these organizations makes you sign this waiver that says if we screw up your kid behaviorally, you can't sue us.
Yeah.
And they did with Vincent. They taught him it was okay to climb into a washing machine, and they taught him that it was okay to climb out the window on the second story of our house.
My Lord. It's abuse. That is abuse.
the reason that regulating a profession like this is so important is because there's accountability if something goes wrong. So, for example, as a registered veterinary technician, I have a license to practice in this province. I keep it active. I have to do continuing education every year. And I also have to submit a police check. I have to pay professional dues. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I have to do to keep my license. But also, if I go into practice, say I'm working at a vet's office and one of the patients dies, I can face disciplinary action up to and including the revocation of my license. When you have an unlicensed profession, they can do whatever they want. And it's very, very hard to get consequences if there is something that goes wrong.
I'm shocked by what you're telling me. It's unbelievable to be unlicensed. I'm a licensed mortgage agent, Tanya. I have very many of the same rules as you do. We have to be accountable. That's the word. Has to be a set of
Well,
rules, and there has to be an accountable system.
and the good news is, and this is a shout out to Senator Leo Housakos and Member of Parliament Mike Lake. The good news is they championed legislation. It was Bill S203 that aimed to introduce a framework for autism in Canada, and that actually did pass eventually with bipartisan support and has received royal assent. The problem is the Liberals haven't done anything with that since, but that's the first step in getting this to where it needs to be. And Alberta right now is regarded as one of the best provinces to actually get autism treatment in there. It is not perfect, but the other provinces need to be looking at what Alberta is doing and take what's working and bring that back to their provinces. One of the most shameful things that we had heard was a family was complaining to their member of provincial parliament in Ontario about how bad the autism program was, and the response from the member of provincial parliament was, "Well, then move."
Wow. Big heart to talk that way. Unbelievable. Ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you not only to buy the book, and it's on Amazon, but look into this. The need for help, the need for support with autistic children, with lots of children who have challenges. Just become more aware, which I think is what the message is for Northern Perspective. If you want deep, thoughtful, well-articulated, and courageous, not only political commentary, but they just gave you commentary on something that isn't political, I urge you to follow these two. Watch their podcast. If you're lucky enough to meet them, just know that they're great, great people, Canadians, parents. And Ryan and Tanya, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just honored and thrilled to have had you on the show.
Pleasure is ours, sir, and hopefully we can come back and have a conversation again in the future.
Okay, how about tomorrow? So, guys, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our viewers, our listeners. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please like, please subscribe. And right after you're done watching their podcast, come back and watch ours. Or do ours first, then go to theirs. Doesn't matter. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks for watching. If you found it interesting and you liked it, give us a thumbs up. If you're ready to subscribe, click right here. And if you'd like to see another episode, click right here. Tell a friend. Send us comments. Thanks a lot.